Like Israel, it starts when the manna ceases. It starts when the manna ceases. And I want to preach to you tonight on the subject that I've entitled, When the Manna Ceases. When the manna ceases. God, I ask you in this house today, Lord, let the divine revelation of your word come forth, God, in the Spirit and in the power that you have given it. I ask you, God, to speak your faith to the people that are gathered here together. I pray, oh God, that you speak your faith, God, into this church. I pray, God, that you not only speak to the spirits of the people that are here today, but I pray, oh God, you speak to the spirits of the people in this city. I pray, oh God, that you speak to the spirits, God, that gather against this church in this house today. I pray, God, by faith, God, that your word go forth, God, into the hearts and minds of the people that are gathered together here. But I pray, oh God, that your word go forth, God, to the spiritual oppositions against this church and to the spirits, God, that come against us. I pray, oh God, that the spirit of faith would enter into the hearts and the spirit of faith would enter into the minds of the people that are gathered together in this house today. That somehow, God, in the midst of this church and in the midst of this service today, and God, beyond all that we do in this house, God, but would go beyond everything, God, that we do here today into the year to come, God, that faith would be delivered, God, and your power would come forth, God, and your strength would speak to the people in this house today. Let your word come forth, God, and let your faith, God, be delivered in this house, I pray, by the authority of the name of Jesus Christ, I ask. Amen. Amen. I believe what I'm preaching you today. I believe what I am preaching to you today. You may be seated. A whole nation of people were taken out of Egypt. They left with the clothes on their back. They left with the tools that they had, whatever they could carry in their wagons, whatever tools that they could carry on their shoulders, whatever tools that they could carry, and whatever animals could carry it. They left with the animals that they had. They left with some food. Whatever was in the house, the Bible says that they made unleavened bread quickly so that they could leave. They gathered whatever grain was around there. They gathered whatever leeks and garlic and all of the things that they could, onions and whatever it was that they could put into a bag and onto a container. They left with it out of the land of Egypt. But it didn't take long for them to go through the desert, to run out of the water that they had brought with them and to run out of the food that they had put in their satchels. The people had to have something to eat. They were in need of food. Where are you going to get food when you are constantly moving? Where are you going to feed your wife, your family, your kids when you cannot settle down and plant a crop and wait for that crop to come and grow? How are you going to be able to get the food that you need to sustain yourself and your family? You cannot hunt in the desert to find enough food to feed 1 million people every day. Every day. So God gave the people a bread-like wafer. The people called it manna. I wonder what it was like when those people walked out, George, and they walked out their door and there was this stuff on the ground. I imagine it to be about that big, about the size of a small pancake or something like that. I imagine it to be kind of crunchy, just crispy like a wafer. I wonder what it was like when they walked out there and they picked that up. And for the first time, they ate that manna. The word manna literally means, what is it? What is it? Exodus 16:31 tells us about that first day. It says, and the house of Israel called the name thereof manna, and it was like coriander seed, white, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. Wow, pretty cool. That's pretty cool. To be able to go out of your tent, walk out to the desert, and there laying on the ground is your food for the day. For many years, the manna was their food. They ate manna for every meal of every day. You see, it was the only thing that they had to eat. They could not get another source of food. I'm sure along the way, maybe here or there, they found a root of this or a wild something there, but that was so rare because you're talking 1 million people, and for you to be able to be the only one to find this, that you would be able to get it before somebody else got it. The reality of it was that you're going to eat manna every day for every meal. That's what they had. There was no other source of food available. They became tired of the manna. They got tired of eating manna. Now, how many of you like pizza? How would you like to eat pizza for breakfast, lunch, and dinner all week long? You know, after a while, you're just going to get tired of pizza. I like steak, George. And when we were out on the platform, we could have steak every week. And sometimes we had steak twice a week. But you know what? After a while, steak and shrimp, you get tired of it. I just want a cheeseburger today. You got anything? You got any Mexican food that you can make? After a while, you just want something different. And we're not talking, well, we're just going to have this for a month. We're talking years. They ate nothing but manna. Manna for breakfast, manna for lunch, manna for dinner. No matter what you do, you're eating manna. And so I would readily admit that I would want something else as well. You see, these people had lived in Egypt and they had tasted the food of Egypt. They had stews that they had made, and they roasted meat over the fire. They had all kinds of variety of food that they longed for, that they wanted. They had bread every day. They had normal food that they ate back in Egypt, and they longed for the food that they once had. When I was in Bangladesh, I got to eat curry. Now, I like curry. Curry is good. Curry for breakfast. Chicken curry for lunch, beef, or not beef because we were in Hindu areas, so some meat. I won't ask what. Curry for dinner. Curry. For over a week I had curry. Now, I got tired of curry. There was a point where I said, I just want a cheeseburger. Is there any place that they make cheeseburgers around here? I really would like a cheeseburger. It was nice. One morning I went down to breakfast and they had this stuff that looked like and tasted exactly like cream of wheat. Man, I ate that stuff up. It was good because it wasn't curry. So I'll admit that wanting something else, I can't blame. I couldn't put myself in Israel's shoes and say, oh, I would be good. Every morning I woke up, I'd be so happy to eat that manna. I know me. But an interesting thing happened to these people. God cursed the generation that left that left Egypt, and told them that they would not enter into the promised land. Every one of them from 20 years old and above died. All of them. And so a whole group of people who had lived in Egypt, that whole group of people that had been there, passed away. And a brand new generation of people grew and became the people that God would lead into the promised land. These people never knew what beef tasted like, and never knew what it was to eat of the garden vegetables. They were born and raised in the desert. They were born and raised walking through the desert. The only food that they ever could remember eating was manna. That was it. They didn't know what the rest of the food tasted like. They couldn't remember what it was like to have an apple or an orange. They couldn't remember what it was like to sit around and have stew. They did not know what that tasted like because they grew up in the desert. They were of the children of the promise. And God said, I'll lead you into the promised land. I'll bring you into the promised land. I'll give you these things. But they had never had anything but manna. Never had anything but manna. Soon this generation found themselves walking across the Jordan River and into the land that they had been promised that they would receive. It was a land that they had only heard about. They had never experienced it. It was a place that to them at times must have just seemed like a dream to them. But now they were walking on the land and they were looking directly at the promise that God had given them. All these people knew was the life that they had been born into. All they knew was going from place to place. All they knew was to set up tents and break down tents. That's what they grew up. They did not live in Egypt. They didn't have a permanent house in Egypt. They didn't know what it was like to have a real roof over their head. They didn't know what it was like to stay in one place forever. They did not know. The only life that they knew was getting up and traveling, going from here to there. When the cloud would stay for a while, we might stay for a couple months in this area. That's all they knew. All they knew. That's all they knew. These people only knew manna as their food, and they were totally unaware of any other type of food to eat. They didn't know about fruits and vegetables, and they didn't know about things that grew up out of the ground that they could eat. Joshua 5:12, our opening scripture says, And the manna ceased on the morrow after they had eaten the old corn of the land. Neither had the children of Israel manna anymore, but did eat of the fruit of the land of Canaan that year. When they stepped foot into the promised land, the manna stopped. When they walked their first steps, spent their first day, got into the promised land, the manna stopped. It stopped. While their feet touched the earth on the other side of the Jordan, the manna ceased to be a part of their life. They got up that morning. They opened their tent when they were on the other side of the Jordan. They got outside their tent and they began to look around. Manna. I get up today. I'm going out to do what? To get the manna. Why? Because we just had manna yesterday. That's what we've had for the entire time that I have been alive. It has been the food that I have eaten. I walk into the promised land. I open up the tent of my tent. I open up the door of my tent and I walk out and I'm going to go gather my manna. I look here, I look there. I find no manna. There is no manna. God did not give them manna when they got into the promised land. Why? Why would God stop the manna? Why wouldn't God just say, you guys are going to continue to eat this for the rest of your life? You're going to continue to walk and eat these things for the rest of your life. Why did he stop the manna? It was because it was never the will of God for manna to be their eternal food. The manna was only meant to bring them into the place that he had promised these people that they would inherit. The will of God was that these people would eventually eat from the promised land that he had given them. The land was so rich and the land was so fertile. All kinds of food grew in the promised land. All kinds of food was available for them in the promised land. There was a diversity of the taste of the food that they could eat. Manna only tasted one way. Manna only had one flavor. There wasn't a beef manna and a chicken manna. There wasn't a manna that was for breakfast and a manna that was for lunch. It was the same manna. You had the same flavor. It had the same consistency no matter what. It was God's will for these people to go into the land. We have to understand, God was not leading them around a desert just for the purpose of parading His people around for other people to see. God was bringing them to a place. God had them walking every day that He would bring them into His promised land. In Exodus chapter 3 and verse 8, God speaks to Israel before He ever brought them out. He spoke to Israel about the place that they were going to go into. And in Exodus chapter 3 verse 8 says, "And I am come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians." I'm going to take them out of Egypt, but I'm going to bring them to some place, and to bring them up out of the land unto a good land, and unto a land flowing with milk and honey, a place of the Canaanites and Hittites and Amorites and Perizzites and Hivites and the Jebusites. I'm going to bring them out of Egypt, but I'm going to bring them into a land. What is that land like? What is that land going to consist of? Will it be a dry and a barren land? Will it be a land that they have to work hard and try to survive in? Will it be a land that they will need all kinds of help just to grow anything? No, God said it would be a land flowing with milk and honey. What He means by that, it is going to be so fertile. There is going to be things in there so great, things that you never dreamed were even possible. You sit here in Egypt and you think you got good food in Egypt. You sit here in Egypt and you think that the stews of Egypt are great, but you have never tasted of my promised land. You have never tasted of the fruit of the land that I will bring you into. My promise is greater than anything that you've ever experienced. My promise is more full and more rich and more flavorful than anything that you've ever experienced before. The things of the desert were never meant to be permanent for these people. The wandering was never meant to be their life. Setting up and breaking camp and constantly moving had its purpose, but it was to bring them to this land. The manna had a purpose. It was to get them to this land. The manna was never meant to be permanent in their life. The manna was never meant to be something that they would live on for the rest of their life. God only gave them the manna that He might bring them into the promised land. God only gave them the manna for the period of time that they were wandering and seeking after the promises of God. That's what the manna was for. I just want to sustain you in the time of your travel. I just want to sustain you in the midst of your going to and fro. I just want to sustain you in a place where you're not going to be able to put your roots down and grow. But when I get you to the promised land, and when I get you to that place, you're not going to eat of the manna anymore. You're going to eat of the promises that I have given you. You're going to eat of the things that I've told you that I would give to you. Once they entered the land, the things of the desert stopped. This was what they had been told about from their parents and their grandparents. This was when they walked into that land and they looked around, and there was grapes so big that the Bible says when the first 12 spies went in and they came back with the fruit of the land, that a cluster of grapes had to be carried by 2 men. We're talking about things that were just so amazing and so rich. They had so many things that when they walked into that land and they looked around, oh my, look at all of the things that we have. I have never tasted a grape in my life. I have never had corn. I don't know what it's like to eat an apple or anything like that. I've never had wheat. We haven't been able to grind wheat and make bread. Does anybody even have a recipe for that anymore? What are we going to do with all of this food? There's deer, there's antelope, there's all kinds of things for us to eat in the promised land. And it's so much better when you're eating in the promised land. The manna stopped. When the manna stopped, they ate of the fruit of the land. As good as the manna was, the fruit of the promised land was better. Manna had not been the promise. Manna was not the promise of God. Manna was not the promise of God. The land, the fruit of the land was the promise. Israel realized the promise was greater than the provision. Israel realized the promise of God was greater than the provision of God. They had provision in the desert, but they were going to a promise. And the promise of God was better than anything in the provision. The provision was only to get them to the promise. The provision was necessary. It was needful. The provision had to be there. The provision had to give them those things. The provision was extremely necessary. Thank God for the provision. Thank God for His intervention. Thank God for the manna. Thank God for the water. Thank God for the clothes that they wore for the many years that never wore out. Thank God for all of the provision. But it was never meant to be the promise. It was never meant to be the thing that they would inherit. There was something so much greater that this people would inherit that would go beyond anything that the provision could have ever been in their life. The promise far superseded the provision. The house that they were soon to receive was far superior to the tent that they had been living in. The fruit and the vegetables was much greater than the manna that they were eating. What they received in the promise made the time in the desert become forgotten. It made it forgotten. It made it forgotten. Here we are. 2017. Here we are, 2017. And I've seen things over the past 3 years that have astounded me. I've watched the power of God move through our church in ways that I've never, ever seen before. Never experienced it, Brother Mitchell. I've been in Texas and I've experienced some great things in Texas, but I haven't experienced things in Texas that I've experienced here. I've witnessed miracles more numerous than I have ever seen in my life. It's in every service occurrence that we are experiencing these things. The power of God constantly moves in this church. People are being healed constantly among us. And I'm not talking about, oh, I got a little headache. Oh, Jesus took my headache away. I'm all good. Hey, I am not trying to minimize that. Lord, forgive me. I am not trying to minimize that. And I'm not talking about I got a paper cut. I'm talking about miracles that go that are absolutely laying in a hospital bed with them telling me that they're going to cut me open and they're going to divert my intestines. I don't want that to happen, Brother Mitchell. I'm really not in a pro-favor of that. That's not something that I would like to have happen. Diverticulitis is what killed Brother Yance. And I'm laying in the hospital with that stuff. And they're telling me they're going to cut me open that night. I'm prayed for. I make it through the whole night. I don't have an issue. I sleep like a baby, other than when the nurse comes in to check on me and pull my blood pressure and the things that she normally does. I slept great. I wake up in the next morning. The doctor comes in. He looks at me and says, well, you look good. Think we're going to let you go. I said, can I have a milkshake first? They gave me my milkshake. Miracles. Miracles. I'm talking miracles. I've seen miracles that God has done. I have seen things that are just that just astound me. I posted the miracle of Lily on Facebook. There was over 15,000 people that viewed the testimony of that miracle. We have seen miracles. It's just every service that we're witnessing these things. I have seen and heard more tongues and interpretation than in any other place that I've ever been. The Spirit of God is active in this church. The Spirit of God is active among us. I spoke Thursday on the many that have been baptized and filled with the Holy Ghost this year. More than I have ever seen in any church that I have ever been a part of. It's just incredible. It's just incredible to see God do this. But that is not the promise of God. Do you understand? That is not the promise of God. That's not the promise. 47 active members of this church is not the promise of God. We have 47 active members in this church. That is not the promise of God. That's a provision that God is giving us. That is people that He's adding to the church daily, such as should be saved. But the promise of God is even greater than that. We had 16 people baptized in the name of Jesus Christ for the remission of their sins in 2016. But that is not the promise of God. That is the provision of God. We saw 14 people receive the baptism of the Holy Ghost, evidenced by speaking in other tongues. That is not the promise of God. The promise of God far supersedes the provision. The promise is so much greater. The promise is so much more powerful. The promise is so much more great than anything that the provision could ever even dream to be.
Right.
We've been eating manna. We've been living in tents, all for the purpose of getting us to the promise of God. Everything that has happened to bring us to this point. The manna only sustained us to get us to this point. Hear the preacher in this house today. Listen to the words that God is speaking to you today. The manna got us, the provisions got us to the point that we are that we could enter into the promises of God. But it's time for the manna to stop. It's time for the manna to stop. And I know our brains are going through this and saying, but we've had such richness and we've had such goodness. Pastor, we don't want that to stop. Nobody's talking about that stopping. When the manna stopped, did the Israelites starve? No. When they walked across the other side and they put their tents away, did they have to live out in the open rain? No. What was on the other side? The promises of God. What was the promise of God? You don't have to eat that manna. That's just a little bitty thing. That's just one food. I've just been giving you one flavor. That's all you've ever had is one flavor. You've only lived in a tent, just a little place that you would set up and break down. Just a little dirt floor. I've got something for you so much greater. Oh, but God, we love that manna. Oh, but God, I really enjoy my tent. And God is saying, you've just been eating one wafer. I've got a land full of fruit. I've got a land full of glory. I got a land that is so rich. I got a land that is so rich. It's time for the manna to stop. And it's time to walk into the promises of God. It's time to get into the things that we never dreamed were even possible. It's time to get into the things that we only heard about in foreign fields. And we only heard about in the miracles of other places. It's time for us to look beyond just 16 being baptized in the name of Jesus and only seeing 14 receive the baptism of the Holy Ghost. It's time to go beyond that. That's just the provision. But God says, I've got a promise for you. I've got a promise for you. I've got a promise for you. We started our year of resurrection 3 months ago. This is our year of promise. We cannot lose sight of the fact that this is our year of promise. This is our year of resurrection. This is our year of resurrection. We made it through a year of war. We got through a year of peace. We had our year of crucifixion. And God said by prophecy, God said that there would be a year of resurrection like none other. Like none other. There is a year that we have gone into. We are not on the other side of the Jordan looking at the promise of God. We have crossed the Jordan. But we got to stop looking for the manna. We got to stop looking around for that manna. We got to start looking for the fruit of the land. It's time to lift your eyes up and stop looking at the things on the ground. It's time to start looking at what's growing in those trees. It's time to start looking on the fields, for they are white and ready to harvest. It's time to stop looking for the manna. It's time to start looking at the promises of God. God gave the promise. I did not speak to you the promise. I did not give you the promise. I could not give you a promise from God. Whatever I would say to you would never come to pass. But has there been anything that God has spoken to this church that He has failed to do? Not one thing that God has ever said that He would do in this church has ever failed. God has made everything that He has ever said come to pass. Every time we have come against an obstacle, every time we've faced a foe, every time we've gone through a valley, every time we've had an issue, God has stepped in and brought this church out and gave this church the strength that it needed. My God has done that. I'm so far off my notes right now. I'm looking at the land before us, and I am so excited. I am so excited. By faith, I see the things that God has given us. When I began to get ready, and I spent some time in prayer and fasting for this message, and even in December, God began to stir me, and God began to put things inside me, and I began to look at 2017, and I began to look at this year of what God would do in this year, and there is such an excitement inside me. There is such a faith for what God is going to do. There is such an excitement about what God is going to accomplish in 2017. This will be a banner year for this church. This will be a banner year. There is something that God is going to do in this church and in this city that is going to amaze us all. I see the promises of God ahead. I see the victory that God has promised us. What God will do this year is going to surpass anything that we have ever seen before. There is something that God has placed inside of me that just knows that God is going to do this. There is a faith that is inside me. There is a faith that God has put inside me. Church, if there is anything that I can do in this year, if there is anything that I can do in this service today, I want to cast the vision to you in this service today. For 2017, I want to cast the vision inside of you in this house today. The faith to believe what God is going to do. I want you to receive the faith to believe that God will do these things. I want you to understand and have the faith to believe it, to see it not with your natural eyes. If you looked upon the congregation today and all of the empty chairs that you would look at, you would say that it's not going to happen. But I want you to look by faith, and I want you to believe by faith what God is going to do. You have to understand, Israel walked through a desert. They had not seen the fruit. They had not eaten of the fruit. They only had the manna. But by faith, they believed that the fruit was there. And when they crossed the Jordan River and they walked into the land, it was all there as God said it was. By faith. I want you to get the faith that's inside me. I want you to believe it like I believe it. I want you to have the faith inside you like I have the faith inside me. And this is the year of the promise. This is the year of the promise. Come on. Don't let the devil lie to you. Don't let the devil steal your joy. Don't let the devil steal the things out of you. Get the faith inside you that says, this is the year of the promise. This is the year of the promise. This is the year of the promise. Brother Mitchell, God revealed something to me. I was talking with another minister. We're talking about when you pastor for the first time and you start a work for God. I worked as an assistant for so many years, and I felt burden, and I felt desire. I helped my pastors. I did what I could, and I had the burden inside me. I had a passion inside me, but it was nothing like when I stepped into the pulpit here. Things changed. It just completely changed for me. There was a complete difference when the city and the responsibility of the city came on me, and there was a burden that came on me like I've never had before. There was a passion that came on me like never before. But something happened in the spirit. When you stand up and you, by faith, you step into the place that God wants you to step into, and you step into the will that God wants you to be in. Hell realizes that you have just positioned yourself and you have just put yourself in the very place that God wants you, and hell rises up with a power that is greater than you, with a force that is stronger than you, with a will that is over your own will. Hell raises up with that. Hell comes up with that. Hell says, this man is standing in a position opposing me to do a work that God has for me. I have to overcome him. And he comes against that man. He comes against that church with a force that is greater, with a will that is stronger, and with a power that is superior to the church. Now, you think I'm blaspheming. Hear me out. So what God does is God says, well, we'll just one-up you. And I felt this, Brother Mitchell, when I stepped into the pulpit and I felt the opposition. I felt the power of God come inside me. I felt the authority of God come inside me. I felt the strength of God come inside me that said, devil, you want to raise up against me? You want to come against me with what you think is powerful, with what you think is greater, with what you have? You want to take me on with the weapons that you have? God places inside the man of God a strength that is greater than the enemy, with a will that is stronger than the enemy, with a force that is greater than the enemy can have. When you first stand there, you're standing against an enemy that is greater. You're standing against an enemy that is mightier. But God places inside of his people, and God places inside of his church the strength that is stronger and the power that is greater than the enemy. When Israel walked into the promised land, they didn't walk into a place where the people were walking around without walls and without weaponry. No, when they walked into the promised land, you got to remember, these people, they didn't have a lot of armament. They didn't carry shields and swords and all of the things. They were desert people that walked through the desert. They came out slaves. They didn't have armament like the other nations round about them. When they faced an enemy that was greater than them. Walls that were higher, stronger, more powerful. But when God stepped on the stage, God took those people, and God said, there isn't a weapon that'll be formed against you that will prosper. There will not be a weapon that they'll come against you that'll be stronger than you. It doesn't matter if they got catapults. It doesn't matter if they got crossbows. It doesn't matter if they got archers on the walls. None of that's going to come against you. None of that's going to stop you. Why? Because I'm just going to stand up on top of those walls, and I'm going to bring them down to the floor, and I'm going to cause the enemy to run in your sight. Why? Because whenever you face the enemy, whenever you come against the opposition, the power of God within his people comes up stronger and mightier. God enlivens. God brings the power. God fills the church with his authority. We are coming into the year of the promise. We are coming in. We have entered into the promised land. The manna has ceased. It's time to eat of the fruit. It's time to eat of the things. But you and I have got to understand that we're going to come against opposition that's greater than anything that we've ever faced before. We're going to come against weapons that are going to be stronger than anything that has ever come against us before. We're going to face situations that we have never faced before. But let me tell you something. When we come against those things and we stand on the battlefield against the enemy, the things that God is going to do inside his people, God is going to put a faith inside you. God is going to put a power inside you. God is going to put a strength inside you that you've never walked in before, that you've never had before. God's going to place it inside you. You're going to stand with a strength, and you're going to stand with the determination, and you're going to stand with the power that you've never had inside you before. God's going to do it to you. Why? Because we're in the promise. We're in the promise. We're claiming the promises of God. We're claiming the promises of God. These are the things that he said he would do. And when you walk into an enemy that's greater, and you walk into a power that is even greater, what you're reaping, what your victory will be greater than any victory that you've ever had before. You thought it was good in the desert. You thought you had good things out there wandering and eating the manna. When you go in and you come against Jericho, you're going to have victories that are greater than anything you've ever had.
That's right.
And the spoils of the war are greater. Amanda, the spoils of the war. When you overcome the victory, when you overcome the enemy, when you take on that enemy and you defeat it in your life, and you defeat it in your city, and you defeat it in your church, the spoil of the war is even greater. 3 kings came out against Israel. God destroyed those 3 kings. They took captive, destroyed their armies, went into their cities. People that didn't have much, walking in the desert, they don't got much. Now they're looting. They're taking.
Sure they are.
They're getting. What are they getting? The richness of the promises of God. What did God say? I'll give you vineyards you didn't plant. I'll give you houses you didn't build. I'll give you these things. Why? Because it's in the promise. What has God said to this church? What has God said to this church? Not my word. Not what I said. It's not what I told this church about. It's what God said. It's what God said He would do. Thursday night, God spoke to this church in one of the most powerful tongues and interpretations that we've ever had in this church. God said something to this church that was incredible. If you were not here, get the typed out portion of this tongues and interpretation. You need to hear what God said. God said, you've seen the rays of the sunlight as they come up over the horizon on the land. You've just seen the rays. But the ray is not the fullness. It's not the brightness. You felt some of the heat from those rays, but you've never felt the fullness of the heat of the sun as it rises upon the land. You've never felt that. You've experienced the rays and you felt the warmth as it first comes up over the land. But I'll show you the fullness. We've been eating manna, Brother Mitchell. We've been eating manna. All this time we thought we're eating the fruit of the land. We're not eating the fruit of the land. We've been eating manna. We've been eating manna, Tom.
Sure.
All of the gifts of God.
Yeah.
All of the fruit that God's going to fulfill. All of the things that God said He's going to do. God's going to do.
Yes,
We've walked into it.
yes,
We've walked into it. Have faith, church.
yes.
Have faith. We have got to buy this with everything that we have.
Right.
God is loosing His power in our church and in our city this year.
Yes. Amen.
Victory reports are going to fill this church this year.
Yes.
Victory reports are going to fill. I've asked God. We have right at 47 people that normally come, are normally members in this church. I've asked God at the end of 2017, I'd like to have 80 people, 80 normal, not just people that we see once in a great while. I want 80 people that are here constantly. I asked God at the beginning of 2016 for one person a month to be baptized in Jesus' name. I am asking God for 2 people. I want Him to double it. I want 24 people at the end of this year to have been baptized in Jesus' name. I want 24 people to be filled with the baptism of the Holy Ghost at the end of this year. And I believe God will supersede it. God will supersede anything that I can ask of Him. There isn't anything I can ask of God that God says that's just too much for me. That's more than I can give you. That's more than I have the power to do. No, I believe God can supersede. I'm just telling you by faith what I believe God is going to do in this year. We got a responsibility. Can we stand?